Hello. This speech is about how to give your first proposition opening speech for the online debate tournament format. A couple of things you need to know about posting your video that's good for every video that you're going to post in terms of the online format. The first is that you should always post your video knowing that you have enough time for it to actually upload. There is an amount of time it's going to take to upload, and then there will be inevitably technological problems that you'll run into that will cause your video to be posted late unless you give yourself sufficient time to deal with actually uploading the video. What this means is that you should not wait until the last half an hour or 15 minutes or even 5 minutes to post the video and then have to email the tournament administrators asking for a time extension as a result of the uploading going slowly. So make sure that you give yourself enough time to upload the video and deal with any technological problems that could happen so that way you don't have to send an email asking for that additional time. The second thing you should do, because this is an online format which gives you the ability to record yourself and watch your recordings, is that you should also then edit your videos before you actually post them online. So for instance, if you happen to give an amazing speech but there is a bunch of background noise during the video because either your computer is being too loud because of the fan or you happen to be in a bus because you need to do it in a bus because you just don't have any other time, is that there's ways that you can edit those videos very, very simply in order to eliminate background noise, in order to clear up the volume so that way your opponent, and more importantly, the judge, can hear everything you're saying. So within the lecture section in terms of the online competition, there's a video about how to edit your videos for sound quality in order to eliminate background noise, as well as also how to splice together different scenes. This can be done very freely, which is very freely and cheaply, but it also gives you the ability that beyond simply just editing your video for sound, say you did 2 takes of your video and in one take you happen to do really good on a certain argument, but are not as good on the second set of arguments you're making. But then in your second take, the reverse is true. You can actually edit your video so that way you can put the good take from the good portion of each of the takes together to have one really good video that you then post to the internet. So you should utilize this online format to allow you to be able to give the best debates that you're able to possibly do, which means you should never be in a situation where the hour before the video is due, you're just starting to watch your opponent and then record your own video, because if that's true, you don't have the chance to watch yourself to make sure you can be heard, or give your speech over again so that way you can improve upon those things that you didn't do as well as. The online format is meant not just so that way people could debate against each other, but so that way they can also watch themselves debate, because when watching yourself debate, you'll learn different ways that you could do things even better, and you'll learn to see those types of elements or speaking styles that you happen to do that may not be as productive as you would like them to be, and so you can utilize your time more efficiently in a world where you watch your video and then actually re-record it or edit together. The other thing is you should think about your background. Some of the videos that I recorded in this section I just did in one of my brother's rooms haphazardly, so that way I was able to get the video up in time. Not necessarily an ideal background. However, today I was able to record my video within the debate office, and so I decided to set it up so that way you can see part of Binghamton University's campus in the background, as well as the trophies that the speech and debate team has won. This is a type of way that you could think about what is in your background, so that way it's not just your dirty laundry. Oftentimes, you could actually use your background to help make arguments for you, so that way if the debate topic is on something that you might be able to have videos being displayed of on the background, you could do that. You could also, when editing your videos or thinking of the ways that you can post videos, it does not just have to be of you speaking. You could show video clips, you could show images, any number of different things that you could then be speaking over if you do editing correctly, or just a way in which you could be able to have something else up there to show your judge or show your opponent this is what it really looks like for a second, opposed to just having it be, a head in the box speaking. You could also think about if you want to be a head in a box or a full body behind a podium. Different ways to actually go about presenting yourself for the background will be able to sort of influence or build up that ethos in that round that will help actually your judge sort of connect with you a little bit more than maybe the opponent who just does it in their dorm room. The online debate format is graded on 5 different components. The first component is delivery skill. How good are you at actually speaking and delivering your arguments? Are you a good speaker? Are you a mumbler? Can you be heard? Can you not be heard? Those are the types of things that judges are grading for when you think about delivery skill. The second category is the use of evidence. Within the online format, you are able to post links and citations to the evidence that you reference. You don't actually have to quote the evidence within your speeches, but you could be like, Harvard Science Journal makes the argument that, and a brief paraphrase. And then, when posting your video, also post the link to that article or the full citation so that way your opponent and judge can do that. The use of evidence category is to see how much of your arguments are based by evidence and research versus just your own opinions. Your own opinions are important, but in a lot of these topics, having evidence or some element of research can help make your opinions even stronger in actually articulating them to the judge. So you always want to have some evidence during the course of the debate, and use of that evidence is absolutely important. Some judges may view a quantity of evidence being important. Others may view the question of just the quality of evidence, and one or two key pieces of evidence can be more important than a huge quantity. And always, in this regards, good evidence is better than bad evidence, and a good opinion and a well-reasoned argument is also always better than bad evidence. So don't just throw citations just because you happen to find them. The third category is responsiveness to the opponent. In debate, you both have to answer your opponent as well as advance your own arguments. Both these things are absolutely essential in order to be able to win your debate round. Responding to your opponent and answering their arguments is absolutely vital. The category of responsiveness to the opponent is how good you're doing at responding to your opponent and not just sort of repeating the same points again and again. The fourth category is the coherence of your arguments. Are your arguments coherent? Do they make logical sense, or are you just using logical fallacies or just speaking nonsense? You have to make sure that your argument is coherent and not just responsive to your opponent. The other thing that goes into judging coherence of arguments is sort of the argumentative structure that you utilize during the course of your speech. So, during your speech, you have a start of the speech, a middle of the speech, and an end of the speech. You should make sure that the speech sort of has a narrative arc that makes sense, so that way a judge who's listening can sort of understand the holistic picture and not just the intricacies of a flow in order to be able to evaluate the round. A coherence argument is a big picture scenario. So think of it as forests and trees. In order to win debate rounds, you have to pay attention to the details in the trees a lot, but in order to win and influence your judges, you need to be able to tell a story and have a picture of the entire forest. So coherence of arguments is a forest-based mechanism of being able to judge and rank debaters. The last category that you're ranked on is identification of key points. This category is more like the trees. Were you able to identify those points on the flow and those points in the debate round that are crucial and important to you winning or losing the round? In every debate, there are normally more than a single issue or a single argument that's going on, and so identification of key points is graded upon your ability as a debater to identify those points that are important to answer, those portions of your arguments that are important to extend and continue to focus on, and those points that aren't as relevant where you don't have to spend your time. So identification of key points is judged on that. Now, it is possible for you to do better in all 5 of these categories and still lose the debate round because you happen to miss one key point. Chances are you would probably not do as well as the identification of key points portion of it, but you might be a really good speaker, or you did really good evidence, or been really responsive, but have just missed the element of flow. So these 5 things that it's graded upon is graded in relation to your speaker points, or how good you do as a speaker, versus whether you win or lose the debate round, which is whether you have won or lost the debate argument. Obviously, these 5 categories of judging also heavily influence who could win a debate round, so normally the person who is a better speaker and does better in all 5 categories, or the majority of those categories, also wins the round. It's just not always necessarily the case. So, those things being said, how do you give your first proposition opening speech? Well, you only have 4 minutes, so you need to think about the way that you want to use those minutes, and use those minutes very, very well, because you're the person who's framing the debate, and if you frame the debate poorly, you allow your opponent to be able to come up with new avenues to attack you, and also lose that ethos right out of the gate. You want to have a good, effective, strong starting speech. And since you know you're participating in this debate tournament before the day the tournament starts, there's no reason for why you shouldn't be able to practice your opening speech, record it, watch it, give it again, and do that several times until you give the perfect speech and the speech you want to give, so that way you're set up in order to be able to best win the round. So use your 4 minutes well, and use them in a way where you've most effectively articulated and argued everything that you want. At the start of the video, I recommend you introducing yourself, your name, and where you're from. I would also state the resolution. Then I would say thank you for judging and participating in this debate round, and then actually begin your time. Things like your introduction and stating of the resolution, or in later speeches what's known as a roadmap, those don't count against your actual speaking time in the course of the tournament. However, you should make it clear that I will now begin my speech, so that way your opponent doesn't think you've gone over time because you happen to go 15 seconds over the 4 minutes, but really those 15 seconds was just an introduction or your roadmap. So make sure that people know when your speech starts, and then when it ends, say thank you, and then also make sure that people know that the speech is over, which is easier because the video comes to an end. In the online format, you're allowed up to 30 seconds over the 4-minute mark. Anything after that, the invite suggests is that there's a rationale or justification for why you will forfeit the debate round. So you should not go over 4 minutes and 30 seconds, and I would say probably even including your introduction, because you should not have a more than 30-second long introduction, and really those 30 seconds are used for finishing up a sentence and not for another 30 seconds of speech time. However, it is up to the individual judge to punish accordingly time violations, which means that the question of going over becomes an issue of how much the judge is willing to vote against you for having gone over, how many seconds you go over, and a willingness of your opponent to make those arguments. So, in any case, introduce yourself, state the resolution, thank the participants, and then begin your speech. What you should also do is you should know your judge. Judges are encouraged to enter their judge philosophy in the online debate before registering as a judge for the online debate tournament. You should click them and see what their profile says about them. This is important for a couple of reasons. First is this online format brings people together from various different styles of debate. Lincoln Douglas, parliamentary, APTA, policy, as well as people who participate in individual events within the speech world, people who exist within mock trial, people who are just students who are interested in participating in an online debate tournament, which means there is also the same sort of diversity in terms of judging. The type of judge you have will sort of change the way that you should debate. If you have a policy-oriented judge, you should probably have some more evidence because that's sort of how they have been situated in order to judge debates. If you have more of a value-based judge, or just an instructor at a high school, or a activist, and by instructor at a high school I don't mean a debate coach instructor at a high school, I mean someone who is not involved with debate, but just happens to be an instructor, those people are going to need less evidence to convince them, as they are solid arguments and an ethos of presentation to the round. And so you should look at their philosophy to see what it is that they're emphasizing or not emphasizing. And, for instance, whether they're okay with you speaking a little bit faster or not fast. I recommend, because of the online format, that you should not utilize the top speeds within policy debate because it does not always transmit well over the internet, which means a lot of your words will be lost even for judges who would normally be able to hear everything that you said if you were there in person, which means that if you decide to use speed, you should try to not use the top speed that you go at because of the technological issues. However, some judges you'll have will be entirely opposed to speed, which means that using it in the round will cause you to almost certainly lose the debate round. If you're someone who does not like speed within debate, you can always argue against speed as a style within an online format that should be able to exist within. And many judges will be very open to listening to those arguments because, again, we have a diversity of judges. Even policy judges are open to listening to the arguments about why speed is bad, especially within an online format, so you shouldn't be afraid to make those arguments. At the same time, if you happen to not like speed but are against someone who is going fast, because of the online format, you do have the ability to watch their video numerous times, so that way you do have the ability to pick up on everything that they've said and respond accordingly. You do not necessarily have to go fast in order to respond to them, because you always have the ability to just utilize your time effectively and make important, coherent arguments that clearly identify the key points and are responsive to your opponent, and be able to sort through and not pay attention to the rest of the arguments that they happen to just be spewing out. So the question of speed is one that comes down to a personal preference as well as a question of the judge. The online format, again, has people from all different forms of diversities of debate, which means that you have to be able to adapt in order to be able to win within a diversity of audiences. And since there's no strikes or preference system with the online format, you also have to be able to adapt to your judge, because ultimately it's the judge who decides whether you win or lose the debate round. Just like in life, you need to be able to adapt to your audience, because those are the people you need to influence, regardless of whether you agree with them and their starting disposition or not. However, one thing that it's just regardless of the style of debate or your background as a debater is that you should always utilize evidence within your speech, which could be paraphrased references. You could use direct quotations if you want to, but always utilize some and always provide some sort of citations within the citation portion of the uploading system, because if you don't, an entire category that you're rated on, which is use of evidence, you won't be able to have anything, which means that you will be behind on that category, which not only makes it harder for you to win the debate round, but even if you win the debate round, means that you'll have a lower speaker points than other people who are winning the debate round, which puts you towards the bottom of that bracket. So you should always have some sort of evidence so that way the judge can rank based upon that category. All of that being said, the first thing that you need to be able to figure out to do in order to give a solid proposition opening speech is to figure out how it is that you want to affirm the resolution. Are you going to affirm the resolution as a policy statement or a value statement? As a policy statement, you're able to think about things like who's going to be the actor that would be able to enforce the norms. So if the topic is that sugary drinks should not be allowed in school, you could think of it as, should schools ban sugary drinks? Should districts ban sugary drinks? Should states or the federal government ban sugary drinks? As well as enforcement mechanisms for how the ban could be able to take place. That means you can actually debate over a very specific policy. At the same time, the topic, sugary drinks should not be sold in schools, could also be read as a value statement, which means that you could defend it as a value statement, that these should not be sold in schools, but it is not a question of policy implementation. And the debate could be a debate about how should we interpret the resolution. Again, even if the resolution is something like the United States federal government should do something, or the United Nations should do something, you can still approach that as a value statement and not a policy statement. That you don't have to defend a specific piece of legislation or a specific resolution the UN or the United States has to enact or enforce. Rather, you can defend it as a value about why they should enact a certain sort of resolution or policy, or why it's important for these things to be on the radar and things like that, which means that you're very much able to approach any resolution as either value or policy based. And the way that you affirm the resolution will also sort of structure the way the debate will take place and how you structure the rest of your speech. Because whether you're talking about a specific policy, which will require you to talk about specific policies or policy effects, or whether you're talking about it as an ideological statement or an ontological orientation, would then frame the way it is that you want to talk about these things. One of the things that you think about when you approach this is how what you're doing is topical and how it's relevant to the resolution and affirming what the resolution says you should be doing. In order to do that, you should define the key terms within the resolution. So if it's sugary beverages, you're really going to have to state within that opening speech what you're defining a sugary beverage to be. If it says the United Nations should implement a resolution, you should really define what a resolution within the United Nations is, or if you want to approach it within a valued sense, you should define what should is and understand, and then so that way the debater, your opponent, and the judge knows that you're approaching it should as a value statement, not should as a policy statement, so that way there's a point of contention and understanding of how that initial proposition speech comes across. And there's always other terms that can be defined within any sort of resolution, whether it be animal testing. What constitutes an animal test is something that could be up for contention, which means that any term that could be, defined one way or other, you should make sure that it's specific, especially if you want to have a creative interpretation of the resolution, which I encourage people to do, though by all means is not absolutely necessary. After you've defined your terms and stated how you're going to affirm the resolution, the next thing that you should be able to that you should do within your initial opening speech is identify advantage areas or harms that are important to be able to solve for. Within policy debate language, this conversation should also include a conversation of inherency, or, in parliamentary styles, a description of why the status quo is problematic. So that way, the judge and your opponent know what the status quo looks like and why that status quo is problematic, which is why we need to have a value judgment against something that's going on in the status quo, or why your policy is different than the status quo, because ultimately the proposition team is defending a change or a statement that is against something that is currently going on, whether it be, in this instance this year, sugary beverages in schools, or the dolphin hunt that goes on in Taiji, Japan each year. It requires a certain description of what's going on in the status quo and why is that bad, so that way you can formulate why the change or the value orientation against it is actually important. Now, when you think about your advantage areas and harms, you should pick ones that will be able to beat expected opposition arguments. So, for instance, if freedom of choice or freedom of speech or cultural expression are impacts you expect your opponent to make as reasons for why a dolphin hunt should continue, or why it's important to allow students to have the ability to choose sugary drinks within schools, that this is a reason for why you should pick an advantage that may be able to cut against those freedom of choices. So you could talk about dolphin autonomy and dolphin choice, or you could talk about the way in which capitalism distorts people's true freedom of choices, or things like that. And so you could think about advantages that you'll be able to weigh against the things that your opponent's going to say. Now, within only 4 minutes, I don't think you should actually spend that time preempting arguments you think your opponent will say, because you only have 4 minutes, which is not very much time. Instead, you should think about the advantages, the harms, for the reasons for why you think you should win the round because of your speech that you know you'll be able to compare against the opponent. So that way, in your second speech, you'll be able to say, my opponent believes that this will destroy freedom of speech. However, freedom of speech is not as important as, insert the freedom that you were talking about within your first proposition opening speech, or weigh the actual advantages that you're talking about for how, say, sugary drinks restrict freedom of speech or freedom of choice by eliminating out other options that could then become available. And whatever argument you have that you want, think about an argument that you know that you'll be able to line up and weigh against your opponent, so that way you make sure that your first speech is not just a self-contained speech for why you think what you're saying is a good idea, but also why those good ideas are ultimately going to beat back the ideas you know your opposition is going to be coming up with. In the online format, you normally end up doing both sides of the debate, so that way you're both the proposition and the opposition, which means you've already thought through, ideally, the best opposition arguments that you'll make when you're on the opposition side. You should then think, or go back and rethink, what you're doing in the proposition side before you give that speech, so that way you could think about those arguments and impacts and harms that you utilize to best be able to beat yourself as the opposition, so that way you can utilize those against your opponent as well. After you've identified your advantage areas and harms, you should then explain your solvency mechanism. How it is what you're doing will actually solve the problem. If you're affirming the resolution based upon policy, this should be a question of how is the policy that would be passed in your world of it being fiated would actually solve for the harms and advantages that take place. I.e., a UN resolution against the dolphin hunt will actually cause Japan to stop doing it. Or just the UN resolution against the dolphin hunt will help foster UN credibility, which is good for whatever reason. So that way there's a story for why what it is that you're doing is a good idea in relation to the harms that you're explaining. If you're affirming the resolution as a value statement, you should then, the solvency portion of the debate becomes why it's worth making a statement or why it's worth taking a stance. I.e., it's important for us to say that sugary drinks should not be sold within schools, even if they're going to be sold within schools. So that way we can make sure that we take a stand against the capitalist beverage industries that are forcing obesity upon children, as well as disorientation within classes because of sugary beverages. And only by doing that can we be able to create the proper education to move people away, so that way they make the choices necessary in order to stop drinking sugary beverages and live healthier lifestyles, right? And so that's a reason not for why there's a ban that will be able to solve it, or even necessarily why speaking out will solve immediately, but why simply taking a stance or why the judge voting for the proposition side is important for solving the things that you're talking about. If you can't show that voting for your side is going to have significant advantages that is worth taking a stance for, you're probably not going to win the debate round, right? Because obviously at the end of the day, the judge is going to vote for the proposition side or the opposition side. Your job as a proposition is to convince the judge that there's something seriously wrong with what's going on within the world today, and that by voting for you, that it can actually do something to change the world. And whether that change would happen as a result of being a policymaker, or whether that change would happen as a result of actually of sitting through and engaging within these acts, or as a result of just engaging in dialogue, is something that is very important for you to establish, so that way they don't feel like their ballot is meaningless, but that their ballot actually does something. Again, because it's only 4 minutes, I don't think it's worth the time for you to preempt your opposition arguments. You have 3 speeches as the proposition side to the opposition's 2, which means that you have the time to answer their arguments later on. So your second speech is a great time to answer all the things the opposition has said, but answer it in relation by constantly bringing it back to the things that you bring up in your first proposition speech. So it's better to save your answers after you've already heard what they've said. However, it's best to construct your initial speech ready to be able to answer the arguments that they're most likely to be able to make, which means that it's important for you to think about what your answers will be before you give your first proposition speech, but save your answers for the next speech and allow that first speech that you give, that proposition opening speech, to establish the side that you're on with force. Remember, you're what starts the debate and also what ends the debate, which means your framing needs to be effective in terms of a political, in terms of an ethical, and in terms of just a debate context. You want to make sure that the judge is on your side entirely and you've won that ethos battle right out of the gate. The only way that can make sure that happen is that first speech you're winning the debate and ahead immediately right from the gate, which means that it's very important that you edit your speech, it's very important you think through your speech, and it's very important that you think through your speech in a way that applies to the judge that you actually have listening to your speech at the end of the debate round, as well as deliver it in a way that takes into account the 5 elements that the debate is judged on, which again is delivery skills, use of evidence, responsiveness to opponent, coherence of arguments, and identification of key points. So remember that when constructing your first speech, you want to make sure that you deal with all 5 of those elements, but deal with them in a way that allows you to continue to remain true to the person that you are, make the arguments you want to win the debate on, and simultaneously deliver it with force. Again, I strongly encourage you to rewatch your video before posting it, and even editing together different elements of different takes that you've done in order to give the best video that you're possibly able to do in order to be able to win that debate round. If you have any questions about how to give a better speech, or any comments about how speech is begun in better ways than what I've given here, please post comments below this video, as this is always an ongoing format that will continuously evolve as it exists into the future. Thank you.